Ready to move to the next level in your product career? I'm Shobhit from Intentional Product Manager. Join me as we discuss ways to help you stand out in your job search and your career so you can have more impact and make more money. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Intentional Product Manager podcast, where we dive deep into what it really takes to build a legendary product management career, one where you're strategic, influential, and it supports the life that you want. Today, I'm absolutely thrilled to have with me Saurabh Sharma. He's Chief Product Officer at you.com, Y-O-U. So a bit more about Saurabh. He's led AI, search, trust and safety, and growth initiatives at some of the most forward-looking companies in tech, Google, OpenSea, and now you.com. We're going to dive into real talk about building AI products that people use, designing with ethics, navigating ambiguity when product market fit isn't obvious. So Saurabh, welcome to the show and great to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Awesome. I'm going to start with some warm-up questions. Let's rewind the tape a bit. Tell us how your product journey began and what drew you into building tech products.
Great question. So I'm an engineer by training, and so I spent the first few years of my career as a software developer at IBM. And throughout that whole process, I was always attracted to not only the technical complexity about what we were building, which was a great mental challenge for me, but also why were we building it? What did the customer actually want? And over time, I found myself more interested in those questions than necessarily the engineering that was required to behind it. Now, the engineering is, as we know, is critical. Can't do anything without that. But I found myself more attracted to understanding those customer needs. After IBM, I started my own startup with a few friends, and that really put me front and center in understanding those customer needs. And after that startup ended, almost by accident, found myself interviewing for at Google as a product manager, and realized that this is really the role that interests me. This is where what that startup journey had taught me, what my time at IBM had taught me was I care about the why a lot, and that a role like product management is often at the heart of the why. What makes the customer happy? Why are they buying your product? All those type of questions.
I often hear people say they don't come from a traditional product management background, but there's none. So it's great to hear about your journey into product.
Yeah, no, it's been a great journey, and I agree with you. There's really no one size fits all journey, right? And I think the more unique your background, it's additive to product managers in general and the skill sets that they bring to the table.
Let's talk more about your career. So you've worked across a variety of domains, from social at Google Plus to NFTs at OpenSea and now AI agents at you.com. What's been the common thread or principle you've carried across those transitions?
For myself personally, I would say that the common thread has always been learning and intellectual stimulation, whether it was trying, for example, kids products at Google. This was the first time really that a company at Google scale had started to move into kids products. Very intellectually stimulating challenge, but also very rewarding if we got it right. And thankfully, we did some good things there. Very similarly with NFTs, here is the rise of a new technology with significant potential to do a lot of good in the world. And very intellectually stimulating to say, how can we grow this technology? How can we further it to make it improve the lives of people? And with applied AI, I think it's fairly straightforward to see that the intellectual stimulation is there, but also how can this technology be now harnessed to improve the lives of consumers, make businesses more productive? So that intellectual curiosity has always been kind of at the heart of challenges I take. Now, from a product management perspective, I think that a lot of things I think about three things that lessons I take from different places. First of all, going back to the why that I mentioned, the customers are, what's in it for customers? How do we make them ridiculously successful? Whether those customers are social media users, whether those customers are kids and parents, whether those customers are NFT collectors or enterprise businesses. You've got to just understand what's their pain point, right? And just focus on that. It's probably have heard it a million times in this podcast, but I don't think there's any substitute for it anywhere, right? And then after that, it's the people that are there to solve that problem. right? Do you have the right people? And that's a complicated problem, right? What type of people do you need? How senior do you need them, right? How do you set them up for success? Those are always critical. And then lastly, how do you organize those people to be successful, right? A lot of times I see my role as get out of the way and create the right forums for the right things to happen and then get out of the way, right? And I think that those are those are product management lessons, you could say, that regardless of what the problem is or the frontier is, that those lessons apply.
I think no matter how many times you hear about focusing on the customer, it's just like there can't be enough reminders on that piece.
Sometimes I think that as you get more senior, there's this trap, which is that, well, I have a user research team, or I have PMs that are responsible for sitting in with the user researchers. And I think that's a trap that I'm conscious of trying to avoid, right? And there's no substitute for you being there with the user researcher. There's no substitute for you just taking a call and listening to an angry customer or a happy customer, right? And I think that's one thing that whether I was a junior PM on Google Plus or now, it's that you can't delegate listening to the customer. And I think that's like a critical thing I continue to focus on.
We talked a bit about product management and your outlook. So I'm going to now deep dive into one of the topics about building AI products, like especially something that's really important right now. So you're leading the charge on building enterprise AI agents at you.com. Let's just talk about what are some of the things that product managers are getting wrong when they think of shipping AI products, especially at that scale.
Yeah, it's a great question. Probably the number one thing I see is approaching it as a typical Web 2.0 or mobile product development type of project, right? Where it's like, okay, let's do user research. Let's come up with a hypothesis. Let's get some design together. Let's talk to engineering about it. Okay, great. We have a solution. Let's push that forward. You need some of that, but that's not what the trick is these days, right? There's a lot of talk about how the eval is the new PRD. And I think that's actually critical here, right? Where when you're designing in very subtle ways. So when you're designing these AI agents, a lot of times the person that you're selling it to doesn't really have an idea of what they're capable of. What they have is a business problem that they have in mind. And in a way, AI is so early still that they're looking for a trusted partner to not only build a solution for them, but help them navigate the technology as well, right? And so instead of, the mocks are helpful, absolutely, to get, start to build a vision with your customer about what might be useful, how this could work. But really what I found is the eval is the lingua franca with customers, with engineers, with everybody that's involved in the process. So what your customer wants to know is what's possible. And typically they don't fully understand what's possible the way that you do or your engineering team might, that type of thing. And developing that eval is a conversation starter of sorts with the customer. I've been in a number of times where we said, okay, great. Here's 100 different eval queries that we're going to develop and our expected results out of here. And you see their eyes light up because the first 3 or 4 is like the first 3 or 4 examples that they gave you, right? Hey, I would love to be able to ask this of my AI agent or have it do this if I give it this data and it'll go off and do this. So they say, great, you've got that. But when you give them the other, 46 or 50 or 100 different evals that you're intending to judge the system on, you see their eyes light up. So I didn't know that you could do this. I didn't know that that would be possible. And in a way that I've seen now, evals are like the new UX, right? Now, evals are the new UX. Evals are also the new PRD in that is what your engineering team is going to take and then try to hit, right? And say, and judge their performance on. Evals are also the new contract because as I set up acceptance criteria with this customer about what is good, it's no longer, well, I built you a mobile app, or I built you a this or that feature, or I built you a database with this SLA. The eval is the SLA in the contract, right? Which is, how is this system performing, right? And so this is where the eval is the UX, the eval is the PRD, the eval is the SLA. And that focusing on that is really critical. This is new for everybody. right? If you're a traditional buyer of software, you're used to looking at SLAs, and then, if you don't hit the SLAs, you're going to get some credits back and all that type of stuff. But now we're saying, hey, you need to look at this eval. And by the way, and that's how we're going to figure out whether this system is working to your standards. By the way, we're not going to run that eval. Yes, we're going to run it, of course. But we want your experts, the people that know your business, to run the eval and tell us how we did, right? And so I think it's new to everybody, but it's a very important and critical construct for every part of the engagement that you might have with the customer.
In some sense, back to the human in the loop aspect of AI, this is bringing your customer in the loop of just, is this working or not? Even that basic thing.
Right. And I think that with traditional software, if there's a bug, it's clear. If you're missing your SLA, it's clear. But if your AI agent is sometimes missing the mark, maybe there's some grammatical errors in a documented outputs, or there's a hard hallucination. Without this type of feedback mechanism that's pre-constructed between the customer and yourself, you're going to run into frustration. How do I tell you.com that this thing is working a little bit less than I thought it would, right? It isn't like, oh, there's no bug to report, there's no reproducible bug, there's no SLA hit, but this is where you can frame and construct the eval as the SLA, so now you have the structured conversation about quality with your customer.
I want to bring this to one more thing you've said before, which is that UX trust and user needs matter more than the model. So can you unpack that a bit for us?
Models are, of course, critical, right? We can't engage in this revolution without the underlying models. And there are real differences between models and their capabilities that we see every day and that we use to the benefit of our customers. Once you have that model understood, though, again, going back, it's really about the UX and the trust behind it. So let's unpack these terms. There's a lot of different things here. As I mentioned, the eval is almost the UX. This is what you can expect from the system. At the same time, what you also end up seeing is you have an economic buyer, right? The person that is buying the software. You might be able, through the eval, to be able to help them understand how the system works, what to expect. But that economic buyer has anywhere from tens to millions of end users. And you have to help them understand how the system works as well. If you put just a blank box in front of their screen and just say, great, have at it, they're not going to have a very good environment, right? So what you need to be able to do, again, simple things like UX recommendations about how to use this, right? But then you have to think about training as well. What we found is when we develop an AI agent for a customer, that we have to package it with training for their team. Otherwise, their team doesn't really fully exploit the software and its capabilities. That's not good for the economic buyer. They're like, well, did I get my money's worth? It's not good for us because we want our customers to be happy. We want them to be expanding. And we've seen a direct correlation between training users on how to use this technology and the happiness of those customers. So that's in many ways the user experience around it, to take a holistic view of it, quite different than, again, a traditional SaaS product. On the trust side, trust takes on so many different angles. What I'll mention is that when we're building agents for end users, right, we are in many ways the front line of this company and how their customers experience the company, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer. And so trust, has many different aspects of it, from avoiding prompt injections and all those basic trust, safety, compliance to compliance, keeping up with compliance in the space. But we think about it as, yes, obviously we must be compliant. We have to be secure, protected against prompt injection, all those type of things. But also kind of simple things that we should be cheerful, right? We should be, what is the tone of the company to their end user, right? And because if you think about it as this AI agent will likely comprise much of a customer's engagement with this company, we have to think about they're faithfully trusting us to execute a particular tone, a particular style, a particular way of speaking with their customers. And I think that's again, looking at this trust topic more holistically then of course the fundamentals of compliance and security and all those type of things as well.
That's fascinating, especially the last point of tone. What tone is this speaking on? And a lot of it came to light for me when using ChatGPT, where not the tone aspect, but the training aspect, where I noticed I forget what release, it started to say, oh, there, I've done this. Would you like me to do this next? And I was like, that's an aha moment. Suddenly now it's telling me what it can do, and it's opening up all these possibilities.
One thing I do a little bit is I'll play around with the ChatGPT custom instructions, and it's incredible. And you'll find it on Reddit where people are posting, "This is my custom instruction," and I'll try it out. But the vastly different experience I get with ChatGPT, depending on the custom instructions, it's night and day. And in a similar world, you can't just build one AI agent with one type of tone approach for every customer, right? Every customer is going to be different how they want to present themselves to their customers. And so you have to think through that, and part of the process that we have when we're building agents for our customers.
I love speaking about AI, so I'm going to switch it up a bit. You worked in many domains, so let's talk about like product strategy in different domains. So you've led product in what I would call frontier spaces. So NFTs, applied AI, enterprise search. You were mentioning Google's first offering for kids. So let's talk about some of the early stages when it's not clear what the product market fit is yet, or if it's obvious. How do you design your strategy playbook?
Yeah, great question. I call it like the 3 E's: exploration, expansion, and then engineering, right? So let me step through each of these. When you're kind of in the exploration phase, you're going to try everything out. You need to run fast and, just as importantly, kill fast as well. If something isn't working, move on quickly, right? And try out a bunch of different things. And then that leads to the expansion phase. You're going to start to see early pull well before like revenue really takes off, but you're going to typically start to see early pull in one or two different areas. And then that's where there's a bet that you're going to make to say, great, that's early pull. And I'm going to jump into that early pull, perhaps a little bit earlier than I typically would in an area that isn't a frontier space, because perhaps that's a signal from the market that is going to grow rapidly. And then jumping into that, expanding into that early pull is really critical, because you're able to, again, test again at a higher level of investment, whether there's really something here. And then the last piece is engineering. And of course, engineering is involved in all these different phases. But what I mean by engineering here is you want to avoid the build out of like fully, you want to make sure that there's an MVP that's in place that covers the basics of compliance and security, of course. But you want to avoid building out fully scaled operations until you really see that pull fully established, right? And so scaled engineering is one thing that we're careful about. When do we actually go off and invest into scaled engineering efforts versus, what phase are we in? Are we in the exploration area? We're not looking at scaled engineering efforts yet. If we're in that expansion phase, there's a different level of engineering rigor we want to build in. And in that last phase, then you're building systems for, real engineering, multiple customers, high QPS. Again, there's always going to be the basics of compliance and security, but the level of rigor on top of that is dependent on what phase of the PMF exploration you're really on.
So let's talk about the exploration phase. And you're doing a lot of iterations there. What are like some principles or just ways of thinking that have helped you iterate rapidly towards value?
While frontier markets are fuzzy, the one thing, and this goes back to what we were talking about earlier in the conversation, the one thing that's the same is that there's a user struggle that is concrete. And so I continue to love like the jobs to be done framework. It's let's keep that front and center. Yes, how exactly we're going to apply AI or retrieval augmented generation or all these things is fuzzy. And whether that's repeatable or expandable, all of those things are fuzzy. But that user struggle of, hey, I have 10 million documents that I'm trying to, I have a question about this and I want to use my 10 million documents to create an answer so that I don't have to spend all that time looking through all those documents and I can be that much more productive. That user struggle is the same. And so keeping that user struggle front and center is critical, right? For example, with NFTs, the job wasn't collect JPEGs, right? The job was signal status, belong to a tribe, that was the job to be done. And so keeping those jobs to be done front and center helped me navigate what was a rapidly changing marketplace. Similarly with AI, save me time, help me take my current resources and get more productivity with them, right? Those are the jobs to be done. And so keeping that front and center while everything else around is fuzzy, I think is a very big clarifying function. I think the other thing I would add is um, a lot of times, product managers by their very nature are builders, right? Whether they're, Legos when they're kids or AI agents today, so the natural question is, what should we build? And what I found is like, that's not the right question to ask. The right question to ask, I found, is what's impossible for our customers to do today without us? And that is not an easy question to answer. A lot of times we're doing a win-loss analysis. Why did we win this account? And there's a lot of superficial reasons, right? And you've got to really like knock through those superficial reasons to say, really, what happened? Why did they choose us? Is that a reason that we are going to double down on? Is it, especially when you're in that exploration or expansion phase, is that a thread that we want to pull on that we think we can really create a strategy around? Or did we just get lucky, right? Or it was a toss up. And I think working with your sales team, ideally working with a client that you've built a really good trusting relationship to have that conversation. Why did we win this deal? It almost, you're almost asking, it's almost like if we didn't exist, what would have happened, right? And why did you go with us? It's kind of an awkward conversation sometimes, unless you have a really good relationship. Um, that inversion of question, it's not what should we build, but what was impossible for the customer to do without us is something that I end up focusing a lot of my time on.
One more question about product strategy, like especially in early phases, team alignment. So I've noticed that everyone has their own ideas and hypotheses on what might be most important here. How do you achieve that team alignment in these phases?
I think deep down that people know that certainty is a myth and that there is fuzziness regardless of what that business is, right? Whether it's Google search, which is a quarter century old business at this point, more, or whether it's AI agents, which is an emerging business, 2.5 years old at most. I think everybody understands that certainty is a myth. And so there's no such thing as a guaranteed outcome, but what there can be is a shared hypothesis. And especially at smaller companies, you've got to share that hypothesis. And you've got to, I have a favorite saying, repetition doesn't spoil the prayer. You got to share it over and over again, right? And you have to be transparent, let people question it. So I frame alignment as we have a hypothesis and we have some success criteria for it and some kill criteria for it. And as long as the people understand and have buy-in into that hypothesis and those criteria, you're going to find alignment. Now, was one critical part of this that has to happen before. You've also got to hire the right type of people. If one of the things we look for is resilience, and you're joining a startup in a frontier space, things are going to change a lot, and so there are people that will thrive in that situation. There are people that won't thrive in that situation. There are people that think they'll thrive in that situation, but when it comes up, they don't. And so you've got to find that team that can go through that journey with you. But when you have that team, be as transparent and repetitive as possible about what is that hypothesis that we're testing, what is the criteria that shows success or failure of that hypothesis as well. I think one of the things that differs when you go into bigger tech companies is that I think that the best run big tech parts of big tech companies are able to do that regardless of how much layers there are. But what tends to happen is that the more layers there are, the less that hypothesis and that criteria for success or failure is shared, purposefully or not, with the broader organization, which ultimately makes them a little bit less nimble.
Definitely. And this saying, repetition doesn't spoil the prayer, definitely made its way around Google. Like one of my mentors there used to basically repeat the mission. His thing was, hey, repetition doesn't spoil the prayer. So we're just going to talk about the mission every time we have a group meeting.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that, here at U.com, we do as well, right? Because regardless of the size of the team, there's always new people there's always people that are very heads down, as they should be. So at every one of our, weekly company meetings, we start off with, what are our priorities? What is that strategic bet that we're making, so that everybody at the company understands. And as leaders, you then end up hearing that same message 15 times a week, right? If not more sometimes. But then you kind of realize, again, you're trying to create the forums for people to autonomously make the right decisions day in and day out. And so that is what should be happening, is that you're hearing or saying that same message over and over again. And so I can't emphasize that enough, as awkward as it might sometimes come off to leaders.
Awesome. Let's talk about one more quick topic, Saurabh, but very important one. So with AI, ethical questions start to emerge, and you've been in rooms where ethical questions around AI, data, safety are real. They're very consequential. What's your lens or point of view on responsible design and AI products?
I'll answer this from an enterprise angle, though it's really quite similar between consumer and enterprise from a first principles perspective. It just can't be responsible outcomes, ethical outcomes can't be an add-on. It's it's a necessary condition that needs to shape the product itself, right? And I think that there's two reasons for that. The most fundamental one being that, especially in an enterprise software market, your customers are going to require it. As an example, if you don't handle prompt injections or you're not SOC 2 compliant, nobody's going to buy you. So if you think about it as an add-on after you've done your product strategy and your engineering architecture and all that type of stuff, it's going to be very evident to your customers, and you're not going to have many or any. And so you've got to think about it as a first principles part of your system design, of your throughout every part of your business, whether it's systems design, marketing, sales, right? These things done correctly actually are accelerants to your business and not things that will slow you down. And so, you know, I think that's just maybe to answer your question, there's just a very natural business incentive to think about this upfront. Not only as a way to, at minimum, there are table stakes here, but done correctly, you can use this area to be a way to attract customers and seen as a strength, as opposed to this necessary but not useful add-on, which I think sometimes people approach it at. But as soon as you hit customers, you realize that it's not an add-on. And if you thought about it as an add-on, you're going to spend 6 to 9 months revisiting a lot of your internal systems architecture or the way you talk about your products, so that you're treating it more as a first principles type of part of your product strategy.
So as we come towards the end of the podcast, some questions to get to know you a little bit more. So what's a book that you might gift or recommend most often?
The first thing that comes to mind is probably the most interesting book I read in the last 3 years is a book called Wealth of Shadows. I'm a big history buff. I'm a big economics buff. And so perhaps probably not what you hear on a product management podcast all the time, but I really liked it. It's basically it's a kind of a historical fiction / nonfiction. It is talking about World War II through the eyes of economists, and how just as much as there was a front lines hot war, there was an economic war that had just an important part of the outcome of World War II than all the weapons and soldiers did as well. And I think as a PM, I like to think of myself as a systems thinker, right? Where there are many different inputs, there are many different outputs, and while we all want a transparent box through which this all happens, you've got to think about the system that's behind your product. And so thinking about it, it was a really interesting read to me, and I really enjoyed it. And I think many product managers are those type of systems thinkers, and it's an approach to systems thinking in quite a different way, of course, a very serious way, obviously. But I really enjoyed that book.
What's a product that blows your mind today?
One of the things that I've gotten into a lot is this quantified self approach, from a health and fitness perspective. So, I love the explosion of health and fitness hardware that we're seeing in the market today, right? Whether it's my Apple Watch that can give me my heart rate or my ECG at any given point, or whether it's an Oura ring that is helping me understand all my biometric markers, or Function Health, I'm loving these products that are helping me get a better sense of myself and move away from this like reactive view of my health and into this proactive assistance part. Um, and I'm an AI product manager. So what I look at is I want data to help me be more proactive and use AI, right? And so these this explosion of healthcare hardware, I think we're just at the start of it. Continuous glucose monitors is another example of that, right? Where I want more data and I want to feed it into AI to help me be the best version of myself physically that I can be. And so that entire category of products is an area where I'm really loving it right now.
I do have some friends who've done the function health tests, and then they managed to leverage that with ChatGPT and Perplexity and figure out the actual problem they were having, and the doctors couldn't.
That's right. I have friends with sophisticated medical conditions, and that they will take those, whatever's coming out of their doctor's reports, they will feed it into Notebook LM, and that they have found that to be, there's a saying out there that you have to advocate for your own health. I think that realistically, most of the population is not in a position to do that with any level of rigor. But AI tools now, of course, we have to be cautious, are in a much better position than the limited background most of us have to navigate our own health and be our own advocate for our health.
And then last but not least, what's your personal definition of success right now?
I think my personal definition of success is the same that it's been for, a quarter century, which is I like intellectual stimulation, right? Whether it was building operating systems way back when, whether it was building kids technology, whether it was NFTs or whether it's applied AI, intellectual stimulation, intellectual curiosity. If I'm in a position where I'm learning every day, I feel successful. I feel happy, and so that continues to be a guiding light for me.
So, Saurabh, thank you. This has been incredible. I really appreciate you being on the podcast. And then for all the listeners out there, tell us more. Where can people find you, follow your work, get to know more about you and your company?
If you're an enterprise looking to build AI agents or a developer looking to find AI infrastructure APIs, go to u.com. It's going to give you all the information you need to explore our offerings. Get in touch with us if you're interested in talking. And if you'd like to follow me, just reach out to my LinkedIn. I think that link will be shared. I love one of the things I found about product management is that it's a small community. It really is, and I've been very grateful and lucky with great mentors and great people to talk about things that come up. And I made it a point to do so as well for younger product managers, folks that are facing career choices. There's a community around you, and reach out. I think you'll be surprised. People want to help each other. And I'm more than happy to do that. So reach out to my LinkedIn. Happy to chat anytime.
For anyone listening, whether you're on the podcast platforms or YouTube, it will be in the show notes, all the links that Saurabh is mentioning. So finally, just thank you again, Saurabh, for making time for the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
And then for everyone, if you're listening, you're a product manager who knows that you want more, you want to go to the next step in your career, be sure to check out intentionalproductmanager.com. Let's take advantage of the thing that's most powerful, which is your story. Let's get it right. And thanks for tuning in, and see you next time on the Intentional Product Manager podcast. Hey, be sure to check out our website at intentionalproductmanager.com to see how you can level up in your career.